Welcome to the Diversity Connector podcast, where we explore the rich tapestry of human experiences. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the country on which we meet today. I would also like to pay my respects to elders, past, present, and emerging, and together as we dive into conversations that bridge cultures, challenge stereotypes, and celebrate the unique perspectives each of us brings to the table. Each episode is a journey through stories and insights from a kaleidoscope of voices, each sharing their colorful narrative. Whether you're at home, on the go, or just anywhere in between, you're now part of a community that values understanding, inclusivity, and the beauty of diversity. So plug in your headphones, get comfortable, and let's connect through the power of our shared stories. Welcome, and thank you for joining us on the Diversity Connector podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Diversity Connector. This is Gertrude Mache here in beautiful Melbourne, Australia. And today I am graced with the presence of yet another fascinating guest. Welcome, welcome, welcome to our tribe. Please tell everybody your full name, where you're based, and share your story with us today.
Hi everyone, my name is Antifa McDonald. I am based here in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada. I am an African Nova Scotian woman, born and raised in the community of North Preston, which is the largest Black Indigenous community in Canada. Frequently throughout my story, you'll hear me refer to African Nova Scotian. Some of you may be unfamiliar with that term, but the term is similar to African American, African Canadian, but it's just African Nova Scotian, as we have a unique story that is unique to the African Nova Scotian experience. So being born and raised in Nova Scotia, my ancestors came here over 400 years ago, and they settled here in Nova Scotia. They descended from slavery. Some of them came straight from Africa. Some of them came from the U.S. and traveled straight here through to Nova Scotia. So when my ancestors arrived here over 400 years ago, the government gave them plots of land throughout the province. Some of them are in the Halifax area, some of them are in the Shelburne area, and all through the rural areas of Nova Scotia. These plots of lands, they weren't the best lands. Essentially what the government did, they kind of gave them the land there in Nova Scotia and essentially kind of put them there to kind of not be prosperous and to basically die. But being the resilient people who they were able to settle and create communities and create descendants of people, and that's how I'm here today. I'm 8th generation African Nova Scotian. Being born and raised in the community of North Preston, I went through many challenges. My community was kind of on the outskirts of the Halifax city, about 30 minutes from the inner city, and kind of out on the outskirts and far from anything. Just to give a little bit of context, it's about 10-15 minutes before you get to the closest gas station or to the closest grocery station. So it's somewhat, people kind of call us super country. I would like to say it's not country because that's where I grew up, so it's not really country to me, but to others it's a pretty country area. And in this community of North Preston, it's a predominantly Black community. Everyone that lives in the community is African Nova Scotian, and we are all related in some kind of way. We are all traced back to the same ancestry. And so we are a pretty close-knit community. We know everybody. It's an area where if I were at the playground or if I was up the street doing something that I wasn't supposed to do, best believe before I got home, my mother would know. And being that our community is an African Nova Scotian community, and in Nova Scotia, if you're unfamiliar with Nova Scotia, it is on the east coast of Canada, one of the smaller provinces. And it's a lot smaller than the larger cities like Toronto or Vancouver. It's a pretty small province. And up until I would say about 10 years ago, the province was predominantly just Black and white. You may had some other people who kind of immigrated here, but majority of the population, you were either Black, you were either white, with the majority being white. So we faced many challenges being the minority, and just with those same stereotypes that are present across the world. Those same stereotypes are existing here, and there are also different ones that exist here also. And so within our communities, we never really had much in our communities. Our ancestors had to fight for everything that they have. So our families did not come from wealth. We did not come from a place of privilege. Everything that we have in our community, we had to fight for. We had to work hard for. And although the community is pretty prosperous to this day, it's been a journey and it's been a long time coming. And it's a consistent fight for equal access to anything, whether it be education, employment, resources. Our communities were definitely placed at a disadvantage to our other counterparts here in Nova Scotia. So for me growing up, I'd like to say that I'm from a rather privileged home in the community. My family was they weren't a wealthy family, but they were pretty well off being in the conditions that they were. So my mother, super educated. She's now a principal supervisor with the Halifax Regional Center for Education, which is the school board here in Halifax. And then my dad actually is an immigrant from Jamaica. So he migrated here over, I want to say 30 years ago, which is before my time, here in Nova Scotia. And he got about my mom, and that's my family. Being the youngest of two older brothers, I kind of had high expectations set upon myself. There wasn't really room for me to fail. And that comes with a lot of pressure. With my mom being as educated as she was, and my family being who they were super keen on education and super keen on, breaking those barriers and not being a statistic and not being what they expected us to be. Being here in Nova Scotia, there are a lot of stereotypes that, African Nova Scotians, they're uneducated, or they can't talk, or they're illiterate, or, they don't have any education, or they're not meant to be anything but, a drug dealer or involved in criminal activity. But that is not us. That's who they want us to be, and that's who they make us out to be. But that is not us, and we do not carry that legacy. As much as they try to paint the picture like we do, that is not us. So carrying that burden of, not being who they basically said that I should be, it becomes a lot on the individual, because, when you're now put into a place where you're expected to fail by other people, but when you come from a household that doesn't allow you to do anything, that doesn't allow you to do that, that's a lot of pressure to carry on your shoulders. And so stemming back all the way to elementary school, I had a different experience than a lot of people, and even a lot of African Nova Scotians here in Nova Scotia. The elementary school that I attended was a predominantly Black school, being that it was situated right in the middle of North Preston. And, you would think that, oh my gosh, that would be a great school. It's, all Black kids, everyone knows each other, everyone's like family. But yes, that is the case. And that was wonderful, being surrounded by a lot of my peers from the community. But this is still a school that functioned under the structures of the local school system. And a lot of my teachers and principals, they were not of color. So now you have instead of having 2 or 3 or 4 kids in a classroom where they don't feel safe and where they're not being poured into and where they're not being empowered, you have a whole school full of them. And so that presented very many challenges. And looking back, you don't understand what's really happening until you get older, until you realize, like, wow, these systems are really made for us to fail. And, I always was that individual where I was always able to speak up for myself and not kind of conform to what's normal. I've always been that person who's willing to kind of stand up for what I believe in, whether it's not what other people believe in, but it's what I believe in. I always stood up for what was right. And so what was somewhat seen as, a little small girl who always has too much to say, or always, has to be defiant or has to be in conflict. I feel like back then that was me communicating in the way in which I knew how to in that moment. And as I got older, I was able to grow into myself and to realize, what people tried to silence when I was a child is really a gift from God. I'm a truly spiritual woman. And so as I get older and as I grow and I learn so many things about myself, I realize that everything that's happened throughout my life, it has kind of shaped me and cultivated me into who I was meant to be, and who I was placed here to be. And it kind of has given me my purpose to go on and to be able to do what I do now. Although there were many challenges, there were days when I was like, why can't my life just be easy? Why can't, my family just come from money? Why can't I, just have to not have to fight and just have to live and not have to worrying about being the only person who looks like me in the room, or having to worry about what this person is saying behind my back, or what someone thinks about me when I step into a space, and for people to kind of see who I really am as a person. So as I got older, I started to grow into that. And so throughout my high school years, I faced many challenges, being a super intelligent woman, and, being in those classrooms and knowing that I had the potential to be whoever I wanted to be, but to be put into this box that, I should not have been put into. But throughout those years, that was when I realized, people really think that I'm not intelligent. Like, people really think that I'm unable to do anything with my life. They really think that I'm just supposed to sit back and just absolutely be another statistic. And that was when I made a goal to myself and became very determined to prove them wrong. I remember there was one time when someone said to me, when I graduated with multiple scholarships to attend New York University, which is in Toronto, I had a peer who I went to school with for about 6 years, and she literally looked at me and she said, "Oh, I didn't know that you were smart. How did you get all of those scholarships and I didn't get any?" And that just stems from those stereotypes where this person who I literally was in the class with for 6 years, she thought I was illiterate. And, I don't know what made her think that, because I received very good grades when I was in high school, but that was something that kind of hit me to the core. Like, you really thought that I was really unable to do things just because I was Black and just because of where I came from. And so that was when all of those challenges and those traumas kind of gave me that push that I needed.
Is this what inspired you to become an advocate for equity, diversity, and inclusion, particularly within the African Nova Scotian community?
Yes, it definitely is what inspired me. When I first transitioned into university, my first career goal was, I always was saying, like, through all of my years, I said I wanted to be a criminal lawyer. I want to be able to represent my people and to ensure that, they're not being treated differently. And so I actually fell into the program of human rights and equity studies, and I knew that I always wanted to stand up for community. I think as I got older, what was revealed to me is I didn't know in what capacity I was going to do that. And so as I started studying human rights and equity studies, that was when I truly fell in love with the topic. I learned so much, and I was able to actually understand the meanings and the thoughts and the concepts behind what was happening to me and my African Nova Scotian community back home in Halifax, Nova Scotia. And I feel like that's what became my fuel. I knew I wanted to fight for my community, but like others, you want to do things in life, but sometimes you don't always have that educational background to back that up. So once you're able to learn things, and now you have gained that knowledge, and you're able to provide a little bit of context of what you're actually advocating for, it becomes that much stronger.
That's amazing. So can you share your approach to devising and implementing effective EDI frameworks within organizations?
Yeah, so my approach, I like to take a really authentic and a really deep-rooted approach. I think what sets out my approach is that, when we're looking at frameworks, majority, 80% of the framework is you're going through terms and you're saying like what you're committed to, and those policy things that are sometimes not always implemented. When I'm looking at my frameworks, I'm looking at it the opposite. So if we're looking at the structure of that framework, at least 30% of it is going to be like theoretical, and the other 70% is implementation of that framework. Because ultimately, if we have a framework that's not implemented, it's kind of pointless. It defeats the purpose. And I feel like so much time and effort goes into frameworks, looking at the theoretical side and what this means, and we need to have this included, and this needs to be here, and this needs to be there, but then we leave about 10% to focus on the implementation piece. And so when I'm developing my frameworks, I'm looking at, okay, well, yes, the theoretical piece is important, but if it's not implemented, how important is it? So really looking at taking those frameworks and how can we truly bring this to life, and how can we make sure that the practices that we are doing is a reflection of the frameworks that I'm kind of developing.
Okay. So what are some of the most significant challenges that you faced in your efforts to promote racial equity, and how have you addressed them?
I think one of the major challenges that I face is, especially here within the last, I would say 3, 4, maybe almost even 5 years, because time has been going so quickly. There has been this huge pressure on organizations and businesses and large structures to make sure that they're inclusive and they're promoting diversity, and so they're feeling that pressure from the public, so that and that's why they're taking that step to be moving towards equity, diversity, and inclusion, especially racial equity, especially after the George Floyd. Everyone felt that pressure that they need to be promoting these things. And so that pressure has forced many people who don't really care to pretend that they have to care. And so some of the challenges that I face is that, the thing is that when things shift in society and needs shift, money shifts also. So the thing that I have noticed is that a lot of funding, especially at the federal level and at the provincial level and at so many levels, that there's so much money available to put supports in these areas to promote these things, that people are so eager to grasp onto these fundings, and they don't really have the desire, or they really don't have the passion, or they don't really care to use it in the right way. And so what's happening is that, people are, because now there's so much funding and so much resources in this area, that people are now, taking advantage of these things when their intentions are not in the right place. And I feel like that's what the major challenge is, because this is not a one fixed thing. You can't, hold one training, or you can't just run program and think that everything is all better. That's not how it works.
How do you go about developing and delivering comprehensive DEI training to staff and stakeholders?
So when I'm delivering trainings to staff and stakeholders or community, whoever I'm delivering the trainings to, my approach is, the first thing I do, I do have generic trainings, but in most cases, what I'm doing is I'm making sure I'm connecting with those people to understand what it is that they're trying to learn. What are you trying to get from this training? Because if they're not, whatever they're trying to get, I need to make sure that I'm delivering that. So kind of taking that need-based approach, and same with when I'm developing the frameworks, it's not about learning theories and learning new concepts and learning what this is and learning what that is. It's about how can we make change. So in these trainings, it's the same thing. Instead of spending 30%, instead of spending 80% of the time on going through different theories and different concepts, we're only spending 20 or 30% of the time on going through theories and concepts. And then we're spending the rest of the time brainstorming. We're spending the rest of the time connecting and learning how can we make real change. And, how can we do that? And whether it's at a institutional level or individual level, whether I'm speaking to a leadership team or whether I'm speaking to community, how can we work together to make change happen, to address these concepts, to address these theories, and to implement them, versus just learning about, because it's nice to know what it is, but if we don't really know how to apply it, then It really does. It really doesn't serve a purpose.
So how do anti-racism and trauma-informed frameworks inform your work, and why are they important?
Mm. So it's important because you really need to know when you need to cater to the group in which you are trying to serve. And so speaking to the African Nova Scotian context, which is mostly what I speak to in majority of my cases, it's about that constant learning, that constant commitment. It's about that reevaluation of learning. And so one of the things, especially when we're talking about trauma informed, I constantly speak to this concept of post-traumatic slave syndrome. And I encourage, if anyone that is unfamiliar with that syndrome, they really need to look into it, because if you're trying to serve groups like African Nova Scotians who do carry a lot of the pieces of this syndrome and may not even know it because they're unfamiliar with this syndrome, then you understand why the community is the way it is. And it's important, if you're trying to serve these communities, you need to understand how they function, and the traumas that has shaped them into who they are. Because if you don't understand these past things that have an impact on them, you will never be able to serve them justly.
Yeah. So can you discuss a time when you successfully forged a partnership that significantly amplified the impact of a project or an initiative?
One time, I'm someone who, I'm a champion of partnerships. I'm a champion of working together in collaboration. And there's power in numbers. And there are so many different people in community that you really have to connect with. And if you have people who you're able to partner with, you're able to increase your impact. And spread it broadly. And so a lot of my work that I have done, especially with the last position in which I was in, where I developed and implemented literacy programs, a lot of that was based off of that partnership piece. Especially when you're introducing new things to community, that community is not yet that interested in, or this is something where they're struggling in this area. It's important to meet them where they're at. And sometimes that does mean connecting with different people and different organizations and places where they are comfortable. And that's how you will reach them, versus coming in and using that, that savior complex. It's important to partner with community to kind of be able to reach as many people as possible.
Okay. How do you conduct needs assessments, and what strategies do you use to cultivate both external and internal relationships?
Needs assessments. I use a very different different strategy for my needs assessments. I like to go and to speak to those people who often are not really spoken to. So when I'm working in a new area and I'm working with a new group, the first thing I'm going to do is get in the community. I can't express that enough. Some people, when they're starting to work on a new community project, they're like, okay, well, I can get on Google, I can search this, and Stats Canada is going to teach me this, and I'm going to interview this leader and that leader. But the most important information comes from community. And so the approach that I take is it's the very ground up approach. And speaking to those in the community, it's really getting in and being present, whether it's having a conversation after churches, whether it's, getting into the schools and talking to some of the kids in the classrooms, or heading out to the community center to reach some of those people who are just stopping by and speaking to elders. You really have to use that ground up approach and really speak to the community at a community level. It's great to do that research online and read and speak with the levels of government. But if you really want to serve community, you have to really connect with community in order to grasp the real needs of the community.
Okay. So what does being a fierce advocate for marginalized community entail of you? And can you share a specific initiative that you're particularly proud of?
Being a fierce advocate. So one of the commitments that I have made to myself in my work is that speak up whenever you have the chance. Whenever I have a chance to spread the African Nova Scotian experience, I do that. Whenever I have a chance to speak up for somebody, I do that. It doesn't matter if you're going to make people uncomfortable, because the thing about change is uncomfortable. Things are never going to be comfortable. So I made that commitment to use my voice and to use my power and to use my strength to never conform, and always speak up whenever I have the opportunity to do that, and do it in a respectful and in a graceful manner. It doesn't mean being an advocate does not mean you're bashing. It doesn't mean that you're disrespecting, and it doesn't mean that you're talking down on people. It's just simply addressing the issue at hand. Without spreading blame and without making people feel bad, and without bashing people. It's about speaking up for what is right, doing it the correct way, so that change can happen.
So how do you ensure that your work facilitates equitable access to resources and opportunities for individuals from all walks of life?
I ensure that equitable access, it's for some people, it can be a challenging term to kind of understand, because, we're looking far past equality. And so to really make sure that you're achieving equitable access, you really need to understand whatever is at hand. Understand who was at privilege and who was not, and why this has happened in the historical context. And where the challenges are, it involves you having to look at the great big picture and take a step back and evaluate who needs the most help and how can we help them.
Now, what is your vision for the future of equity and inclusion within the Nova Scotia communities and beyond? And what steps are you taking to realize that vision?
My vision for African Nova Scotians is to be, I guess it's just to be respected for our contributions, to be appreciated for our contributions, and to be valued for our contributions. We made major contributions to the province of Nova Scotia, and we're not often recognized for those contributions. Sometimes it's even unknown that we're even here, but we've been here and we've been contributing for over 400 years. And so how I plan to make that happen is through my work in EDI, and that is kind of why I moved towards that, the route of consulting, because we're not often given a seat at the table to offer our perspective, and to offer our knowledge, and to offer everything that we have. And so my solution to that problem was to make the table for myself. Whenever you're not given that opportunity, you need to make that opportunity for yourself. And that opportunity for me is through my consultant, and to share the story and to help people make spaces more welcoming, equitable for us, is to be there and to providing that support and walking them through that.
I love that. 2 more questions. If I could take you back to the younger you, the young girl who grew up knowing things were not right, wanting to do something to make a difference. If there is another young person who's listening to this interview, who's in a similar position, what 3 nuggets of wisdom would you give them? What would you have wanted somebody to advise you with so you could navigate this space effectively?
I think the advice that I would give them, the first one would be is, do not let anybody dim your light. Your light will always be yours, and it's always ready to shine, and people are always going to be there trying to dim your light. Do not let anybody else dim your light. And I guess the second piece of advice is to trust the process. Things may not come easy, and that you may face challenges, and that's something that I'm continually having to remind myself. That everything happens for a reason. So you have a divine plan and purpose, and something I have to tell myself. I remind myself every day. The same scripture from the Bible is God made a plan for you. He has a plan, and nobody can take that plan from you. It doesn't matter what you may go through. It's all a part of that plan, and it's preparing you and shaping you and molding you into who you need to be to fulfill that purpose.
I love it. I love it. Now let's do the last question as a thought experiment, where I'm going to take you into the future to go and meet the 90-year-old you. And you are sitting at home in your rocking chair, surrounded by your children, your grandchildren, your great-grandchildren. If I could teleport you into the future to have a conversation with this wise woman who's led you up to this point, based on how you're living your life, what would you say to her when you finally meet her?
That is a great question. I would probably tell my grandkids, continue the fight. Keep the fight. And I say that because that's what my grandmother told me. Carry on that legacy. Continue the fight. Do not conform to what society wants you to be. Continue the fight to be who you are and who you're meant to be.
I love it. The other reason why I like to ask that question is that a lot of times, especially for us as women, we don't realize that that wise woman is already in us. She's the whisper that tells you to advocate, that tells you to take action, that tells you to make a difference. So she's already in us, and we need to trust her when she calls us to take action. So thank you for trusting your inner voice. Thank you for bringing to light the story of the African diaspora in Canada. A lot of times we hear about racial inequality in the United States and Brazil, but Canada has never been a place where you would instantly think there are injustices. Does that make sense?
Yes, and honestly, I hear this all the time. Oh, that can't happen in Canada.
Yeah, it's so interesting to listen to you speak. So thank you so much for coming online, Antifa. It's been an absolute honor meeting you. Keep on advocating for equality.
And thank you for having me. I'm happy to share my story whenever I have an opportunity to share the African Nova Scotian experience. I'm so grateful to be able to share that with you all today.
Thank you. And thank you to everybody who's tuned in today. The Diversity Connector is bringing you stories from people from all walks of life, sharing our struggles, our challenges, the things that we advocate for. So tune in again tomorrow when I interview yet another amazing guest. In the meantime, have a fantastic day, morning, or evening, wherever you are in the world, and bye for now. And that's a wrap, everybody, on today's episode of the Diversity Connector podcast. Thank you for tuning in and being part of our vibrant and global conversation. I'm your host, Gertrude Mache, and it's been an honor to share this space with you, where voices from all walks of life come together to weave a tapestry of diverse perspectives. Remember, every story you've heard today is a thread in the larger fabric of our shared humanity. So, as you step back into your world, carry these stories with you and let them inspire you to embrace and celebrate the rich diversity around us. Don't forget to subscribe, rate, and review our podcast to help us share these inspiring stories with more listeners. Do follow us on social media by looking for the Diversity Connector podcast for more updates. Until then, keep connecting, keep listening, and keep celebrating the beauty of diversity. This is the Diversity Connector podcast signing off. Stay curious, stay open, and definitely stay connected.